We're in conversation with the man of the moment, the Chief Economic Advisor, Dr. Krishnamurthy Subramanian. Many thanks for taking your time out and speaking to us at ET. Now, of course, with me also will be our consulting editor, Maithili Bosurmat. Ma'am, over to you.
Thank you, Subbu, so much for joining us on this discussion on the survey.
My pleasure.
I think this year's survey, you got a lot of bouquets. So let me start by asking you, that would you view the state of the economy as distinctly worse than what it was last year? And yet at the same time, you hiked up your GDP estimate from this year's presumed 5% to 6 to 6.5%, whereas last year it was only from 6.8 to 7%. So does that quite gel with the state of the economy on the ground?
So it depends on, of course, what you use as the benchmark for comparison. If you put it the way you viewed it, actually, it's one stance, one way of looking at it. The way we've looked at it instead, that this year growth, we are expecting it to be 5%. There is, if you look at the business cycles in India and correlate it with how the increase in the growth rate and then the decline that happened, it looks like we have actually troughed out. And secondly, if you look at some of the indicators over the last couple of months, those also seem to indicate that there are some green shoots. When you add that there will be some base effect as well from the fact that we basically have a clock 5%. I think the final aspect that I would say is something that we focused on in the survey a lot, which is the financial sector. So we, in the State of the Economy chapter and in my presentation also, I actually focused a lot on how, the first thing, the decline in private investment since 2013 itself is because of the financial sector. And then the impact of the declining investment on growth slowdown, which is basically a 4-year lag, which we showed, is also because of, so starting from basically financial sector troubles to investment to then to growth. So now some of the cleanup that has happened therefore should actually help private investment, and also some of the steps that have been taken should help. There should be, or there will be some, now remember actually what we didn't show all there is a lagged effect even in a 1-year period also. It's not as pronounced as over a 4-year period.
Except that the advanced estimates show the gross fiscal capital formation coming down to just 1% this year as against 10% last year. So despite the sharp decline, you still anticipate an improvement?
So there should be actually private investment. I think when you're looking at the gross fiscal capital formation, you're actually looking at obviously all the components, which is the household, the government, and the corporates as well. I think if we look at from the perspective of the private investment, especially with corporates, I think there should be there should be an uptick which should start showing up in growth. More importantly, it's actually a it's a estimate that we've taken based on the fact that the economy seems to have troughed out, and that there should therefore be an upward tick. And remember, our potential growth rate is still 7%, right? So if the business cycle does turn, then it should be headed towards basically the potential growth rate. And so we've not talked about obviously a 7.5. We basically have said about, and because of some of the uncertainty that you're actually talking about, we've given a range from 6 to 6.5 is what we anticipate. I think in general, I've always actually, even in earlier instances, I've maintained that it's very hard to give a point estimate. And I think this exercise is always something that is actually fraught with some some potential for error. And so I think I want to make this break actually of thinking about what we economists call confidence intervals, and thinking about
from 7% last year to just 5% now. That's a huge
yes. So
drop.
It's actually, and that is something which not only us but many other agencies also actually, which is why sometimes actually maybe half jocularly I end up saying that as an economist you are basically a lot more into analysis. And prediction is though oftentimes actually more of astrology.
Absolutely, macroeconomics particularly.
You're also making a case for a fiscal slippage in the economic survey, of course coming in at a time when our revenues even this year have been very, very low. When you're saying fiscal slippage, what should one be really bracing themselves for? I know the budget is tomorrow, but are we looking at a fiscal slippage only this year or perhaps next year as well?
Would you advocate it next year as well? Because this year is a given.
So I think whenever you are in a situation like this, and we've been in a situation like this in earlier years as well, there is this, delicate balancing act that has to be done between, growth and the fisc. And in times like these, we think that it's actually better to lean on growth, and I'm choosing my words carefully here, saying leaning, not necessarily just dying down on it or putting all the weight there, because the delicate balancing act is also as crucial. But I would actually say that in current times it's important to actually lean on growth, because as Ruchi was pointing out, when you look at the revenues themselves actually are tied with the nominal growth rate of GDP, and in fact, if you look at this year, because of the nominal growth rate being much lower, you also had a situation where the revenues actually declined, because the tax buoyancy depends on the nominal growth rate. So if we lean on growth now, I think it'll also help to sort of balance the fisc. Obviously won't happen immediately, but in over a few quarters it will get balanced as well. In contrast, if actually in the current scenario, if one basically ends up being too tight on the fisc, it may actually not end up, it may in the sort of medium term it may hurt the fisc also.
Certainly there's a case for counter-cyclical fiscal policy, but there's also the demand that the fiscal deficit numbers are not the true numbers, that they hide much more than they show, and the actual fiscal deficit is much higher. And this is particularly damaging when it comes from the former finance secretary, Mr. Garg. So because clearly he is a voice who's speaking from within. So what is your position? Is there a case for complete transparency, or can it be the way the Greece went, when Greece decided to suddenly be completely honest, even though in the real world there is no such thing as complete honesty? We saw how the bond markets treated it. So is there how much of honesty and how much of transparency, and is there a case to still continue, because this is not new?
So see, as an economist, I would recommend that there's basically, transparency is better. But I would also note in this context that it is not just economists, but even sometimes actually, bureaucrats, what they pontificate actually is oftentimes different from what they do when they are in office.
I entirely agree with you.
So, this is, but my stance is definitely for for basically greater transparency.
Let me also ask you, sir, a lot of focus in this economic survey has been on wealth creation. Have we come back to wealth creation after receiving a lot of pushback in the last budget, when everybody was really at the government's throat and everybody was talking about how a lot of wealth has been destructed by the sheer flip-flop of policies?
Also, Subha, here I ask you, you've spoken about the Sensex as a measure of wealth creation. What percentage of the population really invests in the Sensex? So is that an indication really of wealth?
Let me clarify that right away.
Yeah.
There are many indicators we've provided. The Sensex is one among them. So, I think that point is something which actually I don't think I need to belabor on significantly. Now, with respect to your comment about wealth creation, I think the larger point we've made is, I tend to actually not read as much into just recent events as your constituency ends up reading,
Absolutely
which is
not.
But the bigger point we actually want to make is that if you basically look at investment having declined, private investment wealth is basically the cause and effect of it. And if you go back to our ancient thinking, which is basically amply we've covered in the survey, and very carefully provided contemporary evidence as well after liberalization, it is very clear that that wealth creation actually is something that is good for the economy. But that has to also be supported by so the invisible hand of the market has to be supported by the hand of trust. And here, it is, for instance, I've been fortunate that my PhD advisor Luigi Zingales is one of the scholars who's actually worked on trust after the financial crisis, and he's basically shown that the global financial crisis itself was a manifestation of breakdown of trust. And now in the Indian situation also we've had something similar, and that's the broader point that we want to make, which is that that wealth creation through ethical means is something that has been our our forte, and that is why in 3/4 of recorded economic history, India was the dominant force by following this model, and that doesn't happen. Such dominance does not happen by basically happenstance. It happens by design. So let me complete, and so it is really critical that we think about this not in the space of a few months, but basically the model that actually has worked for us and enabled us to be such a dominant power.
There are 28 PSUs to have identified for strategic disinvestment. Only 5 have been done, and some of them the cabinet clearance
There's
is
a
done in
pipeline now.
2016. But why does it take so long, Subbu?
Because there are processes that actually I mean, you'll basically find me agreeing with you, but oftentimes we basically don't understand all this, the crossing the T's and the dotting the I's that has to happen. No, see, this is something which there is a process that has to be gone through, and it has to be done in a transparent manner. There is a pipeline that actually has been. Look, you have to actually take into account that the disinvestment of Bharat Petroleum is a very, very, and it is in the pipeline. Actually, it will, the process is on, but got to give credit where it's due, that it's a change in mindset, that is something which you've actually highlighted in one of the chapters as well, about the efficiency gains that come from from businesses being run by private entities, in the non-strategic sectors.
So it's absurd to have a target of 1.05 lakh crores and achieve just 18,000.
No, see, this is see, again, this is something which projections and realizations oftentimes can actually, they can be at variance. The point I would make is that the stance clearly is one of recognizing that the private sector is far more efficient, and that except for the strategic sectors, it is basically it's important to cede space, and I think that narrative is clearly prevailing in the way I see things.
I must introduce a lighter note and ask you that when you predicted GDP growth at 7%, you had a blue cover. Today at 6 to 6.5, you have a lavender
There
cover.
you go, another univariate correlation. Another univariate correlation might be.
So I just wanted
all
to
that.
ask you, what went into thinking of shifting from blue to lavender? Despite, is it realism? 1 year as CA?
No, so actually I think, see, the theme was wealth creation.
Okay.
And we then basically thought, how do we capture wealth, and that's something which we've tried to do, which is the cover trying to suggest the theme that is, and capturing the theme. Now the 100 rupee note, the new one, is actually of lavender color, and that is why the lavender color actually captures. And as I explained in the press conference as well, the survey is actually a synthesis of ideas from ancient India together with contemporary evidence. And I think what better way than take basically a new note with basically something that has existed.
I just thought we needed to introduce a slightly lighter note.
No, I think I've given you a serious explanation to a lighter question.
So it's not a roast interview. Very happy to know that.
Right, on that note, many thanks for taking your time.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.